Cool. Hi everyone. Firstly, massive thank you to Taylr for having us in. So I'm founder of Taylr. Taylr's actually a new e-commerce business within the UK. We're essentially a competitor to Stripe. I've been in the industry for 15 years now, and I've watched the likes of Stripe grow up over those 15 years. They started in 2012, obviously the two Irish guys in San Francisco. Where I see the UK e-commerce market today, I actually think we're in a relatively difficult position because there are one or two extremely good providers in the marketplace from a technology base, but then we don't have enough competition in the marketplace. And that's where, over my period of time, I've worked for organizations. I ran Visa's European e-commerce platform for 3 years. I've grown businesses in the UK around focusing on SMB. So that's why I thought we need more, and we need more in the UK to support small to medium enterprise. So what I'm talking about today is around how the landscape today in a payments world is changing rapidly. I'll go through a little bit of history, then I'll talk to you about where we are in terms of payments and what the next things happening with payments are. So we're dominated by Visa and MasterCard. There's a lot of things that are right on the periphery in the marketplace today. I will talk about, and I asked Taylr 5 minutes before this to add a video that came out last night from Google around what agentic payments will look like, or conversational commerce payments will look like. So we'll go through a little bit of that, and we'll talk about fraud as well, and how you should be looking at payments within the UK. Because at the end of the day, payments is the end of everybody's sales funnel. So when you look at you guys, anybody that's working in online marketing and marketing general, typically the end is taking a payment. And we still see merchants, regardless of platform that they're using, we still see merchants that have a 60% acceptance rate or a 70% acceptance rate. And so we work with them after all that hard work that you guys and others in the marketing industries, et cetera, have done. After all that hard work, they still have an even more, they drop off even further. So what we do is we work with organizations in order to make sure that they capture as much as possible. As an example, around 70% of small to medium enterprises in the UK still don't accept Google Pay and Apple Pay as a very small thing, but actually it's massive consequence. So a lot of organizations don't recognize that actually the checkout and those final payment pieces are are hugely important in churn and in actually making sure they capture their audience. Couple of little statistics for you on this. 60% of consumers, I imagine most of the people in this room have cancelled a basket or abandoned a basket. One, if you're sitting there watching Netflix or dual screening as people call it now, and you can't pay for something with a button, an Apple Pay or a Google Pay button, you probably then don't make that payment, or you go to a different site and make that payment in a different way. 60% of consumers will abandon a basket that takes longer than 2 minutes to actually close and process that payment. And 81, this is going to be more important as we talk further forward about what's coming in terms of payments. 81% will abandon when their preferred payment method is not available. Again, Google Pay, Apple Pay, and there are others coming. We also see a bunch of other things. So we see things, for example, obviously you get card declines, you get people that don't have, they have insufficient funds, so how do we prevent that? Or how do we enable that? There's things like BNPL that help with those types of services, or BNPL, buy now, pay later, Klarna, those types of solutions. So these things are changing. And so it's a really important thing. That's where we work and we focus to help people deliver. The challenge with this isn't getting any easier. So the reality is the checkout and conversion at the final checkout piece is only going to get more complex. Just to explain a little bit of history, so just to show you how, and the world is accelerating at an unprecedented pace at the moment. We had kind of in the 50s and the 60s, we had the development of the first electronic cards. So then started people using zip-zap machines, and nothing really changed, right, for a very, very long time. Then people started introducing swipe, etc., and that was around for a decade or two. As we move forward, obviously e-commerce really came about in the 90s. eBay was founded, Amazon was founded, etc., and this really started driving people online. Since that has happened, the ways that people are changing has exponentially changed around the world. So cash is obviously in massive decline. COVID did help with that, obviously. But then we have Bitcoin, was actually developed in 2009. We have things like Apple Pay being launched, Google Pay being launched. Klarna was actually launched in 2005, which I found quite fascinating because they only really got big in the last 6 to 7 years. But it just shows how mindsets are changing around consumers as well, and people becoming more digitally native. And so these things are more at the front of their minds. And then one thing that you may not know is we had open banking as a standard global in Europe announced, and we driving open banking standards here as well. This could be a very big thing, along with the likes of Bitcoin, around how we change payments. So in terms of where we are today, these are some more statistics for you. So e-commerce accounts for about 15% of global consumer payments today, which is valued at about 6.8 trillion. This figure comes a little bit relevant when we talk about what's coming in the future as well. That's expected to grow, not quite double, but it's expected to grow to about 10 trillion in 2030. So e-commerce will be a growing part of everybody's basket and everyone's way of buying. Digital wallet growth. So digital wallets includes PayPal, it includes Apple Pay, it includes Google Pay, those types of solutions. They're now dominant, they are a predominant method of payment online. So if you or you work with merchants that don't accept Google Pay and Apple Pay, the reality is that they should be working through this, and we should be making sure that all of them can take those payments. Because 2030 is expected to be around 80% of the preferred method. And we go back to that statistic earlier. As I mentioned, I think there's actually some challenges coming. We have a market in the UK and globally whereby it's dominated by fewer and fewer players. This is actually recognized by the government. Certain players are now being viewed as potentially systemic in UK, so they're looking at how they can put regulation around them. They're also looking at how they can create additional methods of payment outside of some of those large American organizations like Visa and MasterCard. So how can we create a competitive environment better for the consumer, potentially better for the merchant as well? And then just to put certain things in context, Visa and MasterCard in 2024 processed $17 trillion worth of transactions. That is more than the GDP of UK, Germany, and France put together. Okay? So they are processing more money and more transactions, and the e-commerce world is bigger than the likes of Britain, Germany, or France individually. So it's a huge, huge part of the way that everything is happening. It's a smaller and smaller group of people and organizations that are actually managing all of that for everybody, okay? The one thing that's, I will go back and forward on this a couple of times around fraud, because for me, fraud is super important that we ensure that anybody that in the payment industry is working with is managing our partners and our customers' fraud. It is growing. There are things that our industry are doing to reduce fraud. A few years ago, everybody started having to then go into their banking application to make a payment. So you put in your card details, you then accept it. That was the industry going, we need to put more fraud prevention in place. So it's a bit of a hassle, and a lot of merchants saw transactions drop for a while, but it actually reduced fraud. So the growth rate was less, it still grew, but it was less. Then what you see is the people that are building these fraud programs, you see them pivot into other areas, and they find new weaknesses very, very quickly. So in terms of fraud, the top 5 in Europe at the moment is phishing, which obviously is outside of payments, but payments is very much part of it. You have real-time payment fraud. I'll talk to you about what real-time payments mean in a minute in terms of where we are in the world. I'll move that, actually, before I destroy someone's prize. But real-time payment fraud is where I send money to you immediately via some method, but that fraud has increased exponentially. You can see now it's actually about 45% of merchants are seeing that fraud, which has come about really, really quickly in the last few years. So as a payment industry, how do we prevent that? Refund policy abuse and first-party misuse. This is things like chargebacks as well. So I had a merchant a few years ago, really small one. But they were actually 2 stories. One is it was takeaways. So university students were buying takeaways, and then they were cancelling and charging back those takeaways after they'd eaten them. And the merchant had no way of preventing that. So people, just university students, just trying to save some money, some way, shape, or form, right? Other types of fraud that we see when we talk about first-party fraud, that's also merchant fraud. So we had an interesting case where, again, takeaways, but it was a restaurant that all of a sudden they had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Amex transactions. And all of these cards are from the US. They're not UK cards. So what they'd actually done is they'd bought a database of cards and they were card cleansing. They were going through it and they were running all those transactions. And so how do we prevent that? That's the merchant doing those types of things as well. So fraud's super interesting and very creative. So it's one thing that we've got to be looking at when we work with customers. So that's kind of where we've got to a little bit today. How is it evolving? I'm going to get into AI in a minute. I think it's important to talk a little bit about how the world is diversifying in terms of payments. So Visa and MasterCard dominate the world today in terms of online transactions. Apple Pay and Google Pay use their rails, essentially. So when you do a new Google Pay and Apple Pay transaction, it goes via Visa or MasterCard typically. What we are seeing over the next, currently and over the next few years, is a growth in what we call alternative payment methods. I will quickly start calling them APMs as we go through. So these alternative payments in the likes of Brazil and India, and others, you might have heard of Ideal over in the Nordics, these are methods where they're now going they're basically bank-to-bank transfer. They're real-time payments where I send money to you directly and I skip Visa and MasterCard. Some of these have been government mandated, or at least government supported, so that merchants are growing, they're taking in that base from Visa and MasterCard. We then look at account-to-account payments. So it is very similar to real-time payments. Real-time payments, those are typically brands, whereas open banking was a standard set by Europe. And now there's companies and there's legislation going around how we can use open banking. For example, in the UK, something called the UK Payment Vision the government put out last year is about we need different ways to make payments. So how do we bring open banking? Where I go onto a checkout, and that checkout enables me to open my bank account and send you money without going through the card systems. So that's a payment method that lots and lots of people are throwing money at the moment, and we will see over the next few years it becoming more and more dominant, or more and more interesting for merchants and for consumers alike. For merchants, there's a couple of cool things in that I get that payment instantaneously. For a consumer, it's not so great because I pay someone instantaneously, I then struggle to do a refund, or I struggle to get my money back if there is an issue. So that's where we're seeing real-time payment fraud increasing at the moment, whilst it's still in that kind of early era. There's things like decentralized finance. So obviously, lots of people are thinking about crypto. Apparently 12% of the UK now have crypto assets of some nature. So there's lots and lots of things about how can we use crypto as a form of payment, because not only, and it's kind of progressive, right? So you have Visa and MasterCard that are enabling payments here. You have open banking that enables bank-to-bank payments in a consumer environment. What crypto does, though, is skips all of it. Theoretically, it goes, well, I'm just going to give you some money directly, and there's nobody in the middle. So that's where people are looking at how it evolves. And CBDC, this is how do we get the pound into a digital format and interact with it in a way that we would do in a cash society in a digital way. So there's lots and lots of organizations, lots of governments in the world that are looking at how that happens. And then another thing that's really important is we're talking more and more about increasing invisibility. So payments is becoming invisible. You don't know that you're making a payment. I use Line Bike around London quite a lot now, and so I'll go cycle somewhere, and at the end, I don't make a payment, it just happens. So we're increasingly seeing these types of things, and this is, again, going back to that idea of conversion, that's super important because then I don't have to do anything as a consumer. It just happens for me. So it's super important at the end of those journeys. I'm going to give you bit of tech history and then show you at the very end what it all looks like. So this is just me doing some silly little drawings. So 50s and 60s, first cards. We had things called acquirers. So acquirers are organizations. So Barclaycard is an acquirer, WellPay is an acquirer. As we move into the 70s and 80s, we had more card schemes. So Visa came up, MasterCard came up. So the tech got bigger and bigger. When we looked at the 2000s, we have PSPs. So basically, the acquirers sold chip and pin or cards to merchants and to consumers. They had no idea what they were doing with e-commerce. So all of a sudden, these companies called payment service providers started building what we call e-com gateways, so that actually you could take a payment online because acquirers couldn't do it. When I talk about SaaS here, I talk rather generically about anybody that's building websites. So we're talking about a Shopify or a WooCommerce. We're talking about how we, it might be a web developer. So people that are building sites. Then, as we get into the 2000s and the 2010s, Google Pay starts to appear, Apple Pay starts to appear, anti-fraud starts to appear more and more, particularly as we go online. And then as we get to kind of here today, this is what our stack is starting to look like. So through that period of time, it is getting more and more and more complex. There is more and more optionality for consumers. There is more and more optionality for merchants. Everything has a different value proposition. Everything needs anti-fraud in some way, shape, or form. And we get back to those statistics that I said at the beginning, where 60% of consumers will abandon a basket in 2 minutes. So I need to present the right option as quickly as possible. And then 81% will abandon if their preferred method is not there. So if my preferred method is Klarna, and as a merchant I don't have Klarna, they might not pay, and I might lose that customer. So all that hard work that people do in their SEO, in their value chain, their sales funnels, etc., disappears. If I don't have Google Pay, it disappears. So what we're seeing is our world, my world, getting more complex because we own and help with checkout. At the end of the checkout, we're adding more and more features, functionality, and it's increasingly important to make sure that we deliver that as part of that ecosystem. So that kind of brings us up to today. So today, we go through our typical e-commerce flows, etc., and we get to payment. When we look at tomorrow, this is what myself and Sarah, part of my marketing team, essentially drew up yesterday, which basically we talk about conversational commerce, agentic commerce, where actually I'm talking to an AI. I'm not going to a website anymore. I'm talking to an AI, and that AI is driving a payment for me. So, hey, I need to get something. Can you find it for me? Sure, found it. Do you want me to order it for you? Yes, please. So then it goes through and it does the payment for you. So this is what Sarah and I drew up yesterday. The next slide is what essentially what Google released last night. So what you can see here, this is starting in the US. What you can see is on the left-hand side here, I've had a conversation with Google. They found the handbags that I want to buy. I've then actually said I would like to track the price. And then it's told me that it's discounted at the moment. Would you like to buy it? I would like to buy it. Okay, cool. Go pay, press pay. Uses Google Pay. Does the actual purchase. Has never gone to a website, ever, in that flow. So this is quite big, I think, in what AI is going to be driving. So we need to be thinking about how I'm relatively lucky in this process because when it does the Google Pay transaction at the end of the day, when I was reading through the documentation, it uses the Google Pay buttons that the merchant already has, and it uses that flow that we've already created. But before then, that journey becomes really, really challenging. So we've got to start thinking about SEO in terms of conversational commerce across Gemini, across ChatGPT, and all those other things. Within Google, this is obviously going to be a wildly different way in which Google take things to market. And there's loads of other things here. I don't know if you'll talk about some of it as well, but loads of other things around this that Google Pay are actually driving. So back to this technology stack. What does this actually mean? for the first time in this flow, something's changed at the front here. What that means is the consumer is no longer interacting with the merchant, which for me is a really interesting turning point in essentially commerce. So we're no longer, the future might be that we are no longer interacting with merchants directly. It might be that we're interacting with an agent. That agent might actually be interacting with the merchant's agent as opposed to us. So the good thing at the moment is that if we're building technology, right, if people are building on Gemini or if they're building on any of these other LLMs that are out there, we actually have the payment stack to drive conversion immediately. So I'm not saying Taylr specifically, but generally within the payments world, what we can do is we can use APIs that we already have built, and we can drive a payment, and we can drive a checkout experience. So going back to that invisible experience, we can do that today. So we can go through a conversation and we can create a checkout within that environment. So as we work with merchants, that's enabled today. The conversation is what happens in the future. And so there's loads of opportunity within this and loads of challenges. McKinsey and Company believe that over the course of the next 5 to 6 years, the opportunity within this space is $4.4 trillion. Now, if we think about where that stands in 2030, that's potentially almost 40% of e-commerce is now done through conversational commerce in that space. So 40% of the market is now being driven through conversational commerce as opposed to e-commerce. Okay? So I think it's quite an interesting thing that is happening and evolving at this moment in time. So just, again, pulling back into the fraud conversation. So all of this is interesting. All of this is opportunity for people to get really into the whole conversational commerce, AI, how is that going to evolve, etc. But the challenge is, once again, that AI will also be used for bad things. It will be used for fraud. And what's going to happen over the next 5 years is fraud is going to get bigger, it's going to get better, and it's going to get uglier. So we have things such as synthetic identities. So how does the merchant know that I'm actually making that payment? And we're going to have additional things which aren't fraud, which is just chargebacks. How do I know as a consumer that I can trust that agent to make the proper payment for me to the proper merchant? And actually, the merchant isn't a fraudulent merchant. So how am I going to be able to control those things when actually I, as a human being, I'm not involved anymore? And as a merchant, I'm not involved anymore because AI is doing it all for me. So what we predict is that we will see synthetic identities. We're going to see lots of deepfake impersonation. So people will be using impersonation to drive transactions. We're going to see, obviously, and we're already seeing AI-driven phishing. We will see more abuse around chargebacks, returns, refunds, etc. Card testing, I've already seen, 2 years ago, I've already seen what we believe was AI versus AI card testing. So I was sitting there so I was running a large UK e-commerce business, and one of our merchants was being attacked. And they were having cards, so they were trying to buy loads and loads and loads of product, and they were using loads and loads of cards against it. So they could do one transaction, and they would test 1,000 cards very, very quickly. And we were like, well, that's obviously fraud. So we changed the settings manually. Then what happened within 5 minutes? The attack changed. So within 5 minutes, the attack became, well, actually, I'm going to buy a load of products, and I'm going to do one card against every single product. So all of a sudden, they were doing thousands of transactions, thousands of products. Ironically, the merchant didn't care the first time because it wasn't doing many transactions and it wasn't impacting their stock and inventory. Second time, it was impacting all of it. And then we're like, okay, so we changed another thing. And then it changed again. So we used our partner, Count, who used machine learning and AI, we plugged it in very quickly. And then actually, it was basically their learning versus their learning to prevent that attack. And eventually, it dissipated within about half an hour later. So we've already seen that happen 2 years ago, let alone what's coming in the future. And so what we think in 2030 and what the industry talks about in 2030 is we get to this world where we get to zero trust. So actually, I don't trust you in any way, shape, or form to make that payment. So we'll do lots and lots of different checks. We might have biometrics involved in something of that nature. So it's how we make payments in 2030 are going to change. How a merchant knows who we are, or an agent knows who we are, and an agent knows that an agent isn't fraudulent. It gets a little bit confusing at that point for me, but it's going to be, there's a lot going on in the next 5 years around this. So we're working with lots of organizations around making sure that we help around these different aspects. So what does this mean for everybody in the room? And so there's lots of people doing lots of different things within the room. So it will mean different things. But the first thing that we've said is don't panic about it. I could made you a little concerned, but it'll be fine. So don't panic about it, because Google are launching what I've shown you in the US over the course of the next year around checkout, right? So we've got a couple of years to get ourselves in the right place. And there's lots of work being going on in order to make sure that we are in the right place. But what we suggest is make sure that over the course of the future, if you're working with merchants, if you yourself are a merchant, just make sure you're working with the right organizations. The organizations that today are making sure you've got the right payment methods so that you're actually getting the right checkout experience for your customers. Whether that is Google Pay, Apple Pay, whether that is looking at open banking, because there's some great benefits to it. Make sure that you're looking at fraud, because if you're growing as a business, you're going to get attacked. And if you're not growing a business, you're going to get attacked in some way, shape, or form. And actually, small to medium enterprises we've seen over the past few weeks, some massive organizations being shut down because they've been attacked in different ways, phishing, etc. People have been stealing details, etc. And AI has been obviously a part of that. So as merchants, we need to make sure that we're counting, we have partners that are helping us with those types of things, because actually, me doing card testing against Marks and Spencer's or one of those types of things is pretty hard. Me doing card testing against this little merchant down here, who probably doesn't have a anti-fraud solution or anything of that nature, that's much easier for me. So that we will see more attacks across SMB as well. Review that infrastructure. And so depending on who you are, there's different things that you need to be looking at. And it's super important at the end of that journey to make sure you've got the right things in place. The too long didn't read was, from my point of view, payments, and for a lot of us in the world, payments are critical for the increase in conversion. So making sure that we have the right endpoint, the right end of the journey, is critical in making sure that any models, any sales funnels, any marketing funnels are correct and working and converting high. E-commerce is increasingly how people pay. It's also going to be changing quite significantly over the future as well. So we need to be with forward-thinking organizations. It does create huge opportunities though. Merchants that adopt some of this technology early are going to win. Payment providers that adopt it early are going to win. Suppliers, marketing suppliers, etc., that adopt it earlier are going to win, because it's going to be a massive part of the future and very big growth rates within it. And then obviously having the right partner is critical to getting payments right, whoever that may be. And it affects both your top line and then your bottom line as well, as you can look at reduction of cost within all of this. I think that's the end for me. I suppose there's any questions, isn't it? So I've finished there. Hopefully that's been interesting for everybody. Thank you. Cool.
I've got one question for you.
Okay.
How does Taylr fit within this ecosystem? I mean, we've got a room full of HubSpot users as well.
Yeah.
Can these guys use the Taylr system? Is it available right now? Is it something you...
So it depends. One, it depends how you're using HubSpot and what you're doing, right? So right now we work with small to medium enterprises, and some of them are building things on WooCommerce, Magento, etc. So we work with those guys to make sure that their end journey, that checkout at the end of that, is correct. With HubSpot, we're working on that at the moment. So we're working on getting that integration done so that, I will be blunt, we can replace Stripe, for example, in that space. And so if anybody's doing work with merchants out on websites that aren't that have a different checkout experience that isn't a HubSpot-led checkout experience, 100% we can do stuff with that. And then HubSpot is coming, essentially.
Thank you so much.
Cool. No worries. Thank you.